SFHA and the Housing Support Enabling Unit are running this jointly, and we've got some really good speakers to talk to you about this. So my name is Eileen McMullen, and I'm really pleased to welcome our speakers, who are Donna Bell, who's the Director for the Mental Health and Social Care Directorate in the Scottish Government. We've got Niall Eistevan, who is the Chief Executive of Eldon Housing Association, and Ian McFarlane from Blue Triangle. I think we've also got a panel, so apart from the speakers, we're also really pleased to welcome Angela O'Brien, who's the Head of Independent Living and Fuel Poverty in the Scottish Government, and Ruth Robin, who's a portfolio lead for the Health and Care Improvement Hub. So we've got a really good lineup of speakers and panel members that will be able to answer questions and deal with comments and queries. So before I pass over to the speakers, just a few kind of housekeeping things. So your audio will be muted during the session, but if you would like to speak and ask the speaker a question directly, you type that into the chat or raise your hand, and then the team will be able to unmute your microphone, and use the chat and the Q&A bits of the system just as we go as well, and we'll try and make sure that your questions are dealt with. So I think the speakers will be on video while they're speaking, but quite a few of us will turn our videos off just because the system might not be able to cope with all the videos. If you'd rather not have your video on, just turn it off, but it's really good to see people, especially when we're asking questions or making contributions. So thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to hand over to Donna Bell, who's going to speak first. There will be a couple of minutes after each speaker for questions as well, just to deal with the kind of urgent ones that you need to ask. But I'll hand over to Donna first of all, and she's going to speak from the Scottish Government.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Eileen. And thanks for inviting me along today. Really pleased to be here. So most of you will be familiar with the Independent Review of Adult Social Care, so I won't go into huge detail about the report itself. I think, though, it's important to restate some of the key principles and recommendations that Derek Feely and the panel came up with, and I suppose just put them in the context of what the new Scottish Government proposes to do. And I say new Scottish Government, we are now probably about 6 weeks in, 5 or 6 weeks into having a new set of ministers. So it is still relatively new, particularly when you think about the scale of the challenge that lies ahead of us. But certainly plenty of opportunities that ministers and civil servants are keen to take forward. So I think firstly, and some of you may have been involved in some of this, the review did an extensive programme of engagement to inform their findings. So thousands of people were able to contribute to the review, and I think a really strong underpinning there of lived and living experience to inform the recommendations. One of the key things that Derek and the panel were very keen to do were to shift the paradigm around social care and really challenge the prevailing narrative about social care support. Despite the challenges that we may have at the moment, social care doesn't have to be unsustainable in crisis or confined to the margins of society. And certainly the findings that the panel came up with, along with Derek, is a real shift in how we think about social care. So moving from social care support being a burden on society to an investment in our people. And I think that's really where we need to start with this. And instead of managing need, we need to think about this in the context of enabling the rights and capabilities of people. It shouldn't be a crisis intervention. It should be preventative and anticipatory. When we come to things like commissioning, we need to think much more about collaboration and less about competition in markets. And all of this needs to be founded on strong and positive relationships between people, staff, providers, organisations, etc., and remove that kind of transactional approach from what we do. There is a real sense as well that social care support needs to be a vehicle to support independent living, rather than thinking about it solely in the context of service provision. And overall, whatever we do, it needs to be consistent and fair, because a really strong feeling came through from the people who contributed to the report that what we have at the moment is neither of those things. In saying all that, I think we're really clear that there's a huge amount that is worthy of celebration. So there is wonderful practice across Scotland. There are wonderful examples of where things work really, really well for people. And Derek picked out a number of things that he could point to there. So self-directed support and support for independent living, integration of health and social care in some places across Scotland, and the Carers Act as well. But the real challenge is that really robust, rigorous and consistent application and implementation. So there were a few areas that Derek put forward, recommendations around putting some method around how we make improvement, a real focus on nurturing and strengthening the social care workforce, making sure that they feel engaged and valued and rewarded, and better support for unpaid carers, making sure that they've got a stronger voice and good networks and supports, and respite to make sure they can continue their role. Most of the focus that has appeared in the press has been around the new delivery system, which is proposed to achieve the full potential of social care support in Scotland. So in the government's manifesto, there was a really clear commitment to the National Care Service. And I suppose the aims are to achieve consistency across the country, make sure that we're improving nationally, ensuring strategic integration with the NHS, making sure that we have clear national standards and terms and conditions, and some real focus on national oversight and accountability. And that will include transforming how we plan, commission and procure social care support. And I think one thing that's certainly shone through for us since we've received new ministers, that is the importance of ensuring that the voice of lived experience is absolutely at the heart of everything that we do and every move we make to redesign. So whatever we do, it needs to be co-produced. So where we are at the moment, we have a 100 days commitment from the government to introduce a consultation on the legislation for a national care service and for the implementation of the independent review. So we're currently in the process of scoping out how that might look and what might be included in that. We are still at the discussion stage with ministers on that. So unfortunately, I don't have a huge amount to tell you at this point in time. But I would really expect that Mr. Stewart, who is the Minister for into Wellbeing and Social Care, who a lot of you will be familiar with from his previous role, will be keen to speak to all of you and a whole host of other people over the summer about the consultation, and then encouraging as many people as possible to contribute to that consultation, either in full or in part, depending on particular areas of interest. So that's underway just now, and you can expect to hear more on that very soon. The other 100 days commitment is to establish a social covenant steering group, and that's really to set out the values and the principles of the National Care Service as it moves forward, and to contribute to our improvements in social care over the next 5 years. So I expect that will be an important group, and certainly Mr. Stewart is keen that that is focused very much on people with lived and living experience and staff. So more to come on that. One final thing to say is that we are very aware that the National Care Service and any legislation is probably at least a couple of years away. So there's a real need to make sure that we continue to improve the support and services that we have in place at the moment over that intervening period, because people can't wait for improvement. I think we're all clear about that. So we are giving thought to how we draw people together to secure that improvement over the next couple of years. So I expect that you'll hear more about that over the next couple of weeks, and certainly during the summer, on how we intend to shift towards more of a getting it right for everyone type of model, so that support and services clusters around people rather than people having to go hunting for support and services themselves. And that will involve collaboration. It will involve supporting each other to do our jobs better. So I won't go on for any longer than that, but I just look forward to working with you as we move forward. I think it will be, I was asked at the NHS event the other week, do you think you can do this? And I said, well, yes, of course, it's not going to be easy. But firstly, there's nothing else for it. And secondly, it's just so important that we get this right. It's a once in a generation type of change. And I think everybody that I speak to is really, really enthusiastic about it. So I welcome your views, your comments, and happy to answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Donna. That's really good. There's lots of opportunity to ask questions, but I just wonder if anybody's got any specific questions they'd like to ask Donna at this point in time. If you just indicate with your hand, and then the team will unmute you or pop a question in the chat. Nope. I think as time goes on, people will warm up a little bit with and we'll probably have plenty of questions at the end for you, Donna. I know that I've got a few, but I'll hold them back till we get to the end. So thank you for that. That was really, really useful. And I'm going to pass over to Niall now. Niall Estefan, sorry, Niall, from Eildon Housing Association, who's going to talk very much from the perspective of a housing association, on his perspective on the independent review. Thanks.
Eileen, nice to see everyone. Apologies for the tongue twister of a name and a housing association, but for those of us that don't, I know recognise lots of people on the call, and it's nice to see a good turnout. For those of you that don't know Eildon or me, I'm the Chief Executive Eildon. We're based in the Scottish Borders and we're a housing and care provider. I think the slight nuance here is that I'm going to talk about this subject from a housing association perspective, and I think Ian's going to come on the back of that and talk more from a care provider's perspective. I think I'm right in saying, and hopefully that'll be nuanced enough so we don't just cover exactly the same ground, and you find that useful and interesting. Molly's working the slides for me, so I hope it's not going to be too Chris Whitty, but hopefully we can flick through the presentation, and I'll try and stick to my 10 minutes. In fact, I'll set my timer off to try and remind me. So thanks for that. Molly, can you just put the bullets up for me, and I'll talk to them all at once on a slide. Yeah, great, thank you. So great. I've been asked to cover these issues, and it's only 10 minutes, so it'll be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I'm afraid. What can we build on? What are the challenges and opportunities? How do we align the 2040 vision for housing with that of social care? I'm going to say a wee bit about technology, and we've been doing some interesting work in that area. I know others have as well. Say a bit what next, and obviously the caveat is this is a personal perspective from me. It doesn't necessarily reflect the views of my employers of Eildon Housing Association, but I've tried to be as robust and open as I can in the context of what hopefully is going to be a good discussion. And if there are any questions later on for the panel, please, only easy ones for me. I'm sure others are best placed to answer the more tricky questions. Next slide, thanks, Molly. So what can we build on? So I mean, get it out of the way straight away. I think the pandemic response has been absolutely astonishing from many organisations operating in this space, and I would pay tribute to my own colleagues at Eildon Housing in terms of the work they've done individually for service users and in partnership with other organisations. And I think, you know, if we're looking for things to build on, I think the resilience, the values, and the sheer effort in very trying circumstances is a good place to start on that. For housing associations, we've obviously got a history of provision here. We've been in this space for some time, and there are deep-seated learning and knowledge within the sector. We are community-based, and I think that does ally itself to the thrust of where policy is going. So that I think plays to our strengths and signals a real significant involvement for our sector. And I think, you know, again, we say this often, but I think I genuinely mean it. Our ability to be agile, flexible, and responsive is a real key attribute. It always has been, but I think it is particularly now during these very challenging times. And I think certainly some things I've written recently and shared hopefully reminds ourselves as a sector that they are key attributes and provides an opportunity for us as we go forwards. But it is still too much of a secret, our work in this area. It does seem to be something that we knock on the door of lots of people to say, what about this that we do? What about that we do? There's really good practice here. And I've posed the question there, whose fault is that? And I pose that because I think partly it's our own fault. I don't think we're good enough at articulating our role. I don't think we're good enough at articulating our impact. And I don't think we're good enough at articulating the opportunities and the solutions that we can provide. And I say that collectively. Clearly, there are things that are good in that space and organisations that do some really good work. But I think collectively, it is still too much of a secret that we tend to be frustrated about internally, but don't reflect enough about what we can do to improve on that. And clearly, part of the discussion today and going forward is about how we can do better in that. For Eildon, again, speaking specifically about our role, I think there are, again, lots of things that we can build on here. We are a trusted partner, along with our RSL colleagues across the borders. We do have representation on the Integrated Joint Board. and other structures and partnerships locally. We are a voice that gets heard as a result of that, and I think we are recognised that we have a key role to play. And for Eildon in particular, we base our approach in this area on 3 key pillars. So we've got an existing and expanding, very quickly expanding presence in older people's services. We've got a long-standing presence in learning disability services, and we have for a substantial number of years delivered care and repair services, which I think are all significant in this space, and that's why we recognise that this is an important part of the work that we do. Next slide, please, Molly. Thanks. Challenges and opportunities. So again, without repeating old ground, the pandemic is clearly a challenge, but also an opportunity. I think the collective memory that we've all got from going through this this difficult experience over the last year and a half or more is quite a powerful tool in terms of what we do next. But I want to say a bit more on this later, because I think that definitely fits in both the challenge and the opportunity category, and I'll come back to that. We know there are pressures on the current system, and there was before the pandemic. We know it's not working well enough now. We know there are problems and deficits. And we know that those pressures are only building for the future, regardless of pandemic experience, but partly as a result of demographics and workforce issues. And we know that the Feely report addresses some of those things and gives significant prominence to those. So that is clearly a challenge, and the pandemic has done nothing but further highlight those challenges. I think vision and leadership is clearly an issue that comes up from time to time. Hopefully, you know, within our organisations and our sector, and I'm talking about housing associations and cooperatives here, we can contribute to that. But we need to be part of that wider, broader vision. And I think having discussions like this about how we bring housing policy and care and social care policy together is an important part of that. There are best practice examples out there. There are lots of them, in fact. I think lots of them that I'm aware of from excellent organisations operating, delivering really valuable services with clear vision. But there is that sense of them being patchy in coverage, sometimes happening by accident rather than by design. And always the recurring issue of, do we actually learn enough from these best practice examples and mainstream them, or make sure that those learnings, both positive and negative, are shared and implemented. Money is an issue. It's always an issue, and I think the Feely review recognised that, and I think they leave that till the back end of the report to cover in the detail that they choose to cover it on. There is the sense of there's a disconnect between what the money is currently spent on and what it needs to be spent on in the future. I know that's not an easy thing on these very valuable and high profile services, but we clearly are needing to realign what the money's spent on. There's clearly not enough. Politically, it's a hot potato. Social care always has been. When politicians do step forward to try to deal with social care, they don't always get thanked for it. It is one of those things that does need cross-party support and a consensus built on it. And, you know, classically, these services have been regarded as Cinderella services. I think it's amazing that the excellent work that does occur, given the paucity of money and the often, you know, marginalised sense of how these services can operate. So, you know, we've got an argument to make ongoing about the financial situation, and clearly that's going to be challenging as public finances are ever tightening in the future. But there's a chance for a fresh start. There is a sense of public opinion now recognising, because of the stresses and strains over the last year and a half, what social care can and must provide. So now is the time, I think, to kind of grasp that nettle and make significant progress. Next slide, thanks, Molly. So how do housing and care visions align? So yeah, I think we do make the arguments. We have been making the arguments, and as I said earlier, I'm not sure we're actually good enough at making those arguments. We still bedeviled by some of the policy and professional barriers, the classic silo thinking that occurs. That's not something that just happens in big governmental organisations. I think it happens everywhere, and I'm not sure we're good enough at talking the languages of the other professional bodies, and likewise them talking the housing and care provider language either. There was some excellent work done last year between SFHA, the NHS and ACOSFO in terms of trying to break down some of those barriers from leaders across those sectors. That was really useful, but it's really where we go with that next and build that greater understanding of what the opportunities and advantages are. I think there are also some creativity gaps, which hopefully the current crisis is helping us to address. So policy responses can be a bit same old, same risk averse. The funding mechanisms are very much, it's either a housing funded process, or it's a health service funded process, or it's a social care funded process, but that kind of creativity about bringing those funding streams together, I don't think is nearly good enough. So I'd use the example of if we're doing things that we are doing extensively on whether it's preventative services like care and repair, or whether it's, sorry, that's my reminder, or whether it's just new residential accommodation, then they're entirely funded by the housing programs, and there's no cross-sector approach. And if we want to think about things about the burden of risk and de-risking these things, then I would I'd ask you to look at a really useful a piece that Angela Curry recently wrote from Hanover, Scotland, on my view of the sector, where she talks about the burden of risk and how we can change that. We do need a more systemic approach. Again, the story here is when I met with a previous chief exec of NHS Borders to talk about the work that we do on care and repair. She said to me, well, they're not people that turning up on my doorstep at the general hospital, so why am I interested in that? I slightly paraphrase, but not too much. And I think that does say that we've got a way to go to bring together these approaches to a more systemic approach. And I think the dilemma we've got, and it's highlighted in the Feely report, is do we go for a really standardized approach, or do we go for a more localized, let a thousand flowers bloom approach? I really genuinely don't know what the answer to that is. I suspect we need a bit of both, depending on what the question is, but it is a bit of a dilemma. Thanks for sharing that link, Karen. I'd recommend that people do read Angela's piece. It was really useful. Next slide, please, Molly, and I'll try and rush through this. I'm not going to say much on tech, but it clearly is massive, has massive untapped potential. I think people are nervous about it. Some people seem conflicted, whether it's service users or providers or policymakers. There are some serious issues to resolve in terms of confidentiality and data sharing and all those reasons, but they're not reasons not to engage, and we do need to learn from each other. We've been doing a piece through the SIFTech programme, and there's a link there for you to look at when you get a chance, but I'll not cover that today. And if you can just go on to the next couple of slides quickly, there's just a very quick summary of what we're doing. So we're using commercially available sensors, and it's really about how we link them together to intelligently inform the work that we do in our care services. So it's not about anything that's new and fancy and untested. It's about how these things all come together and inform our clients, service users, their families, and obviously our staff, to make sure that we can deliver joined up services to them. Next couple of slides just show a couple of screen grabs from the prototype that we have developed. So this demonstrates, this is anonymized information, but this demonstrates that we can bring together property attributes. And the next slide demonstrates that we can bring together some of the personal attributes. And again, I'd stress that these are anonymized, so we're not breaching any confidentiality here. And it's about how we surface these things using available technology to inform delivering good services. So it really helps to augment what are obviously personal services and have to be delivered by individuals. And happy to talk about that in greater detail, either later today or with colleagues that are with the call. I know the SFHA are looking to do a specific webinar on IoT and some of the experiences we've had and others have had on that. So I'd encourage people to engage in that as well. Next slide, please, Molly, and I think I'm nearly done. So what next? I think, the Feely report, in my view, is an absolutely excellent piece of work. some of the quotes, grabs from the report there, I doubt many of us would argue with or contend. So I think it's a really good solid piece of work done very quickly with some very smart people. However, so was the Christie report on future public services, and so was the Hackett report on building regs and fire safety, and so have any number of other really highly qualified, much to be commended, detailed reports that have been done in the past. So I guess the point there is to say the report itself just ain't enough. It's a good start, it's a good collection, it's a good call to arms and a good reminder, but there is this implementation gap, which I think, that, to be fair, Derek and the panel and the report recognises. The report itself won't change anything, it's what we do about it. I do worry slightly we're going to get bogged down in the processes, the structures, the national care services versus local control. Those things are really important, I don't deny that, but in and of themselves, they're not going to change anything, in my view. And I would really worry that we get too bogged down in that. I think key for me is how we break the cycle and stop the guddle, to use the word that was quoted in the report. Current service system feels like a guddle. And I think for me, that's about more than just structures. It's about approaches, it's about sharing best practice, and it's about openness, and it's about flexibility. All of the things that I listed earlier that I think housing and care providers in the sector have in abundance, and we can offer to this debate as we look to implement the recommendations of the Feely report. So not just about structures, it's about doing stuff different and being open to doing stuff differently. And I think I said I'd come back very briefly on the collective memory. So we do recognise that, you know, people now know more than ever that social care matters. It's not just about hospital buildings in terms of how we look after people in our society. It's about the whole system. And I think sometimes that's shorthanded to care homes versus hospitals, and we know that it's about much more than that. The range of services is very extensive. And I think, you know, there is a focus now that the genuine fear that people have that our NHS would be overwhelmed due to deficiencies in the social care system. I think it's really important to keep hold of that collective memory, because that was real, that has caused lots of concern, and lots of issues, but people forget. Even significant one-off issues like the maybe it won't be a one-off issue, but the significant in our lifetime issues like the pandemic. Memories fade, and I think it's important we need to keep hold of what we learn over this period, and use that to do better in the future. And Karen mentioned there's the opportunity to ask a poll question. So I do want to ask you all a question about what we do on the back of the Feely report. I see it's come up in front of us now, and I'd really welcome a response to that. I appreciate it's a bit of a straight-jacketed question in terms of yes, no, or maybe. So do you think we need a new and ongoing, so not just a one-off change fund, to support the recommendations of the Feely review that goes beyond the 20 million that was announced by Jean Freeman in February? So in asking this question, I recognise we've had change funds and various iterations in the past. The implicit reason for asking this question is I don't think that they were successful enough in shifting the dial, in actually helping to transform services. But I think it is a necessary condition for some of the fundamental changes that we're looking at through the Feely report. It's necessary but not sufficient to make this shift. So that's my view. The reason I've asked the question, I'm really be interested to hear your views on that as well.
Yeah, no, so thank you. So yes, I'm the Chief Executive of Blue Triangle. I'll explain who we are as part of that. Relatively recently new in post, only in post since October of last year. And I've been asked to bring the perspective around housing support and homelessness. So bring that to life in terms of organisations like ours, how we operate at the intersection of social care and social justice every day. And like everyone else, our whole landscape over the last good few years has changed markedly, right back from Christie, right through to Public Bodies Joint Working Acts, through to Ending Homelessness Together, the promise, the National Mental Health Strategy through to 2027, etc., etc. And of course, Derek Feely's independent review of adult care. So in this cover slide, I'm never one for management quotes, but I do use quite often this one from the Swiss Army Manual. If the map and the terrain disagree, believe the terrain. Because as Niall spoke about very eloquently, the time is now to be agile, flexible, responsive, bold and decisive about coming together, collaborating around bringing the solutions that we know are needed to deliver the outcomes we all want to achieve. So in terms of what I'm going to cover off in the time, it'll be a 30,000 feet, 600 mile an hour overview of who we are as Blue Triangle, to represent what organisations like ourselves do around housing support, but how we'll bring to life how it's more than that, and why it is. We do live at the intersection of social care and social justice every day. I'll cover some of the implications of a national care service, again, for organisations like us, but absolutely look at the opportunities for collaboration, for integration and for transformation. And why we should be doing that now. Again, as others have said, we've demonstrated that we can do it through COVID and through the call to renewal, the call to action for social renewal. But rather than me whittering on, I'm praying that this is going to work, because I've got an animated video. So hopefully the sound and everything will work. If not, I'll be expecting colleagues to jump in and save the day. So here goes.
Blue Triangle has been operating at the intersection of social care and social justice in Scotland since 1974. We are unique as a national registered care provider, registered social landlord and registered charity. We deliver over 30 services in 9 local authority areas, supporting over 400 people every day. Over 90% of the people we support have ACEs or have experienced adult trauma. Over 80% have lived or living experience of addiction. Over 70% have a history of repeat homelessness, and over 60% have a history of repeat offending. We operate at the nexus of the hard edges context, where complex interdependencies across homelessness, addiction, offending, trauma, abuse and fragile mental health are the reality. Every day we nurture, support and empower around 100 young people, most of whom are care experienced, and over 300 adults, many of whom have been trapped in a system that tries to fix them issue by issue. They may be considered at the higher end or even the highest end of complexity and support needs, but to us every one of them is amazing. Our vision is for a country where everyone is able to access person-centred support whenever and for however long they need it. Our mission is to empower people to thrive, whatever that means to them. We are a homelessness organisation in name only. We love, nurture and empower the next one who comes through the door, seeing them, not all their stuff, but recognising it comes with them. After all, homelessness is a point in time, not a condition. The underlying causes can be many, complex and interdependent. Everyone's story is different, and for some people, a flat by themselves is the last thing they need, at least in the short term. The people we support live with us, or we support them intensively in the community. As such, we are trusted. We know them, we talk to them, we listen to them. We do co-design every day as we ask how things could be improved to help them fulfil their full potential. Many of them tell us they want interdependence, not independence, that they need positive connections, lasting relationships, hope, identity, meaning, and to be empowered. We may be commissioned to support tenancy readiness, but that's only one of a myriad of other interrelated person-centred outcomes, and sometimes it's just not the priority. We need a system that stops trying to fix people issue by issue. We need person-centred commissioning and collaborative working to break revolving door cycles, making no wrong door a reality. We need innovative place, space, support, transition and connection solutions for everyone, but especially for those living most on the edges of our communities. As a well-being enabling organisation, we employ passionate social care professionals. We may not be a deep vertical in a national care service, but we are an essential cross-cutting horizontal who are person-centred, trauma-informed, recovery-orientated and community-anchored in all we do. We are committed to asset-based and collaborative approaches to accelerating and sustaining transformational change. We want to play our part as a catalyst for social renewal, working together to make social care the springboard it can be, not the safety net. We want to be a bridge between social care and social justice, helping to ensure that people are not missed or dropped at pathway endpoints, bringing expertise and innovation to achieve the step changes and outcomes we all know are possible. We want to work with others to think differently and look for radical solutions where all assets in society can be harnessed for social good. All it takes is courageous leadership, passion, and a collective will to make it happen. We must move beyond polishing our problems, and we must be bold. Housing support is all about people and everything that's going on for them. Our cross-cutting role at the intersection between social care and social justice must be recognised within a national care service context. We have a unique role to play in accelerating reform, as we already stand in gaps. We join dots, and we can bring a portfolio of housing, support and connection assets and solutions. The time is now for designing and testing radical new ways, as more of the same or simply tinkering round the edges is not enough. Whether it's public, social, private partnerships to deliver well-being villages with Scottish football clubs as the cathedrals of the people, or innovative housing and support transition options that sit above housing first to break repeated cycles and make active citizenship a reality for all, or connected community models that harness the power of positive connections, lasting relationships, and the lifelong impact of changed people changing people. We are looking to start conversations with anyone who shares our vision and who wants everyone in Scotland to unlock their full potential and to thrive as part of vibrant local communities.
Perfect. Well, I'm hoping you could hear that. I should maybe have asked that. I'm imagining, well, I'm presuming people would have shouted if there was no volume, but that just brought to life some of the headline messages, I suppose, I wanted to try and articulate today before getting into the implications and the opportunities. So, I mean, at the very heart of it, I suppose, is everyone having an understanding of what it is that organisations like mine actually do, what we even mean by homelessness, because as it said in that short video, it's a point in time, it's not a condition, it's certainly not lifelong. And what we do is absolutely focused on well-being. And yes, the people that we support, a lot of them will come with multiple complex needs, if you want to call it that, the severe and multiple disadvantage, the language from the hard edges. But again, we, like other organisations, we're focused on unlocking their potential and empowering them to thrive, whatever that means to them. And so we do operate at that intersection with social care and social justice. Interestingly, homelessness wasn't mentioned once within the Feely report, which is fine. And trauma, I think, was mentioned once pertaining to an economic shock, but not around the impact that it has on lives across Scotland. But I think we are uniquely placed to bring and work with other RSLs, because we are an RSL as well as a registered care provider, to bring forward innovative solutions collaboratively around places, around spaces, around support, around transitions, around connections and around partnerships. And I think we can do it. I think Scotland's got a track record of showing, I know there is an implementation gap, but I think we've shown in the past that we can get on, get together and make things happen. So I think the whole collaboration side, both from at the prevention end of the spectrum, and then right through to connecting people into their local communities in settled permanent tenancies wherever possible, is absolutely key. And we can all have a role to play in making that happen, because at the end of the day, people live their lives in local communities. They don't live their lives in services like ours. So in terms of the implications from a national care service for housing support or homelessness organisations like mine, I suppose part of it is quite simple. We need to recognise that we need to break the patterns and the cycles that happen today. We mentioned briefly in that video that 90% of those that we support have got ACEs or adult trauma, over 80% living experience of addiction, over 70% are repeat homeless. instances and over 60 to 65% history of repeat offending. So yeah, the language is terrible, but it's sort of the best language we have just now. We support people at the higher end, or indeed the highest end of support need and complexity. But as we said in the video, they're all amazing in their own way, and they live with us, and or we support them very intensively in community settings. So we get to know them very well. We know what works for them and what doesn't, around what are the solutions that we should be collaboratively coming and developing around to break these cycles. The human cost of it's horrific, the social cost is horrific, the economic cost. So one figure I always quote is the cost of reoffending in Glasgow alone is over £560 million a year. And at a very human level, the tragic deaths from drugs, alcohol and suicide combined is always the way I look at it, of 3,117, 3117 in 2019. So the highest in Europe, 300% higher than anywhere else in the UK. So the case for change is clear. So at the higher end, we know that there's a cohort of people who live, who sit above housing first, or more of these sort of floating support models in the community. So what are the options around that in terms of the transition, the stepping stone options to transition them in to settled permanent tenancy and integrated in to be an active citizen within their local communities? And there are solutions. We've got ideas about that, and we're looking forward to being able to discuss them further with anyone. But there is a cohort above them at the highest end, who in all likelihood, they do require lifelong support around that. So again, what does that appropriately look like, or what could that look like? Again, we have a point of view on that, given that we are an RSL as well as a registered care provider, and some of the partnership work we've already started to look at around us actually bringing some stock as part of that solution, or partnering with other RSLs and having short transfer of stock. But at the end of the day, it's all about that person, their person-centered well-being. And it is about services, yeah, absolutely, services coming together to do what we can. But at the end of the day, public sector and or commission services can only ever be expected to do so much. So it's the power of public social-private partnerships or other models where we can actually harness all of the assets that are out there to develop new solutions and to test new solutions and then look to mainstream. So a large part of that is we just need to be recognised in the dialogue and the conversations and the debates around the National Care Service that we are here, we're part of it, we're a bit different to some of the other organisations, but we do play a cross-cutting horizontal role. So from a funding perspective, from a commissioning perspective, and where we sit as part of that ecosystem, then yeah, absolutely, I'll be looking to get round the table and bring our perspectives to that and share our thinking. And as we said in that video, we do co-design every day, and the voice of lived experience is key. And yeah, we're chatting to people around that and understanding from their perspective. And the key thing being that they don't want to be fixed issue by issue, seems to be a recurring theme. But out of that, the opportunities I think are immense for us, given where we're at. Whilst we're all up out our seats, I think there's so much that we can do around collaborative working, whether that's service to service. So I already partner with Simon Community Scotland and Bernardo's, and we run Homes First across the whole of North Lanarkshire. We just came together as a consortia to drive that. And I think there's other options for collaboration at a public social private partnership level, which I'll come on to towards the end. We're doing that, working with football clubs across Scotland, which may be viewed as a bit of a maverick one, but they are the cathedrals of the people, and they are embedded in every local community, or most local communities, and they have unharnessed assets, whether it's the stadia, the fans, their sponsor networks. A lot of them have got some amazing community trusts that all did step up during COVID as well. So I think there's some real opportunities around that, and for thinking differently around that. I think we can all become catalysts for social renewal in our own way. And again, as I said in the video, it's just courageous leadership. It's just being bold. It's the passion and the collective will to actually get on with it and just to try some things. It won't all work, but let's try some different ways, because we know that what's needed is person-centred, trauma-informed, and yeah, that asset-based collaboration. So in terms of, I'm not going to go into these, you'll be glad to see, but there's, within my presentation, which will be shared, there's links through to solution outlines for our recovery and wellbeing village models, which we are developing with football clubs. The first demonstrator, talking to ministerial teams and senior people in government around this just now, and locally within South Lanarkshire, to make that a reality at the heart of communities. Their first wellbeing village, they want to focus on recovery, so it's addiction based, the 24-bed rehabilitation and recovery centre and 24 transition flats built. The first centres built within the north stand of the stadium, believe it or not, and the 24 transition flats are within the grounds around the stadium. So it's a recovery and wellbeing village in Hamilton wrapped within a connected community model, structured as a public social private partnership. So that's in the early days of its mobilisation. There's also another interesting model is tenant and guarantor. I mentioned the need to think differently in that cohort that sit above housing first. So again, we're in conversations in North Lanarkshire with the council, with different local, with different RSLs about how we could potentially, as Blue Triangle, have stock transferred to us through whatever mechanism. We support these individuals that need support above housing first at a more intense level, and then at the right time to flip that property back into a settled tenancy. Again, we know that that's something that the people we support look for. A lot of them say that their favourite phrase is, the thought of a tenancy just fries my head. That's what they say to me every time. So sometimes they just need that extra bit of transition support. And again, we can absolutely make that happen. And the connected community model, for me, there's some amazing work going on, similar to that anyway, being led with it across Scotland. And I think that's at the heart of it, because even for an organisation like us, we may be supporting people through some of our supported accommodation services. We may then get commissioned to support them out into community settings. But at the end of the day, our support hours drop to zero because the money runs out. And we end up doing unofficial aftercare because the need still remains. So the ability to connect people in to positive people, positive places, positive organisations, to join up peer-led networks as much as possible, so shared experience networks. It's the real power of changed people, changing people. We developed something like that in Glasgow, and it worked really, really well. But as the diagram at the bottom there shows, it's that the people who live their life at that nexus across homelessness, addiction, offending, and trauma-driven fragile mental health. So it's just different ways of doing that, so that, yeah, the public assets, the commissioned assets are there, but wrapped within that connected community model. So this is the final slide, you'll be glad to hear. So I'm not going to go through this, but again, please, if you have the time, if you've got a spare few minutes, click on this when you get it. We're trying to change the narrative about homelessness, I suppose, in many ways linked back to our mission to empower people to thrive. So 2 of our amazing workers produced a homelessness and hope video and a mental health and hope video. And you'll see, if you log on to any of our social media or follow us on social media, our theme for 2021 is around amazing people. And that's both the people we support and it's our amazing staff teams. So housing support, homelessness, well-being at that intersection of social care and social justice. So yeah, it's just, remember we're here, I suppose. Blue Triangle are slightly different to some of the other organisations that work in my sector, in that we're also an RSL as well as a registered care provider. And yeah, we've got a lot of experience, some deep expertise in certain areas, and would love to have the opportunity to talk through any potential solutions. And we absolutely look forward to having the opportunity to be engaged as the 100 days and the consultation and everything's taken forward, as Donna highlighted with Kevin Stewart. So I think that's it. So I'll stop sharing.